Do you ever get into that situation where you're busy with something and really enjoy doing that, but then bump into something else and instantly makes you forget about what you were doing and just want to focus on that instead? Well, I do get in that situation from time to time, or well, if you look at my channel upload schedule and content, you can see I run into that situation a lot, like really a lot. And it happened again quite recently, because I bumped into this game. Shaddai Ascension of the Metatron was a game that I had to play because it claimed to offer an interesting story premise and heavy focus on an artistic presentation. And whenever a game presents itself like that as a weird or out of the ordinary game, I am instantly intrigued. Because I like weird things, and I like weird games, be it in terms of story, controls, or graphics. The reason why I was interested to play Lair was because it had a very weird and unfortunately dysfunctioning motion controls. And I started to play Shattered Tale of the Forgotten King for the same reason as Shaddai, because it has an amazing, unique art style. And then there are the select few games that manage to do everything weird, like Death Stranding. I mean, have you seen the trailers, or the gameplay, or the bridge babies? Especially the bridge babies. They are weird, yet oddly cute. But I'm getting sidetracked here. Let's focus on Shaddai Ascension of the Metatron. Shaddai Ascension of the Metatron opens with a statement to keep in mind when approaching this game and my review. Its content is heavily inspired by ancient religious text, or to be more precise, the Book of Enoch, which is a book and a story I never heard of before playing this game. The reason why is probably because I'm not a religious person in any form or way. So keep that in mind. I can only judge and talk about the story told here in the game and not in combination of the book. In Shaddai Ascension of the Metatron, you play as the immortal Enoch. You are sent to Earth to capture/purify the 7 fallen angels, who have become infatuated with mankind and are accelerating their evolution with stolen wisdom from God. To find these 7 fallen angels, you have to fight through their tower, which you climb together with your guardian angel named Lucifer. It's a very straightforward story. You basically got 7 targets and you need to go get them. But as simple as it sounds, it actually was written very chaotically. There are many terms thrown at you right from the start, and the story acts like no explanation is needed, and that you should just know exactly what all these terms are or meant. Now, the Great Flood is a term I understand. I know that story. I even know some of the names of the fallen angels, like Azazel, Armoros, and Ishtar. Though I'm very sure I imagine a very different face when it comes to Ishtar than the game wants me to think. But I had no direct clue of what or who the Nephilim were, and the same goes for the Gigori, Bailal, and so on. It was a lot to keep track of, which would not have been a big issue if these terms at least would have a visual presence in the story. But unfortunately they didn't, and were just regularly mentioned and treated like quick side notes that I should recognize or know, while in reality I had no clue. The issue doesn't stop there though, as of course the 7 fallen angels had a visual presence in the game, but they all looked almost identical from one another, and usually you would only see them for a split second, so barely any chance is given to you to memorize them properly. The biggest issue, however, for the story was that the game sets up these fallen angels as your targets, but then is fairly unclear if you have truly beaten them or what it does when you have beaten them. Because sometimes you have multiple encounters with these fallen angels and you beat them every time, but the game doesn't make their final defeat look different or treats it as a final defeat. Instead, you just have to assume that once you don't encounter them later down the line, you have beaten them for sure. Yet, for the next fallen angel, they actually put you in a large-scale boss battle against them, and goes in great lengths to tell you and explain to you what you did once you defeated them for the final time. And this inconsistency of making clear if you beat your target yes or no made the whole story feel very chaotic and vague. And it basically felt like it trashed its simple story premise with every step you took. And the characters themselves aren't treated better in this story. Of all the characters that were in the game, Enoch, Ishtar and Lucifer were the most memorable. Enoch, however, was only memorable because you played as him. He had no noteworthy character traits or impact on the story. Ishtar was a lot more noteworthy than that, not only because of my own imagery, but whenever she was in the story, an actual narrative for the story was created. It felt like things were happening and it felt like the plot was moving a little bit forward. A feeling I was missing badly before she was introduced. But then there was Lucifer, and he's the real deal. He kept me in the game as he was a fun and cool character to interact with. As your guardian angel, he travels with you through the tower, and you run into him regularly as he serves as your save point. During these run-ins, he is always on his phone talking to God, which I thought was really funny. Not only because God apparently has a cell phone, but the way Lucifer talked to him, that I thought it just was really funny, as it sounded like he was reassuring God as how an office worker would do towards his spouse when he unexpectedly has to do overtime at his job. Lucifer also served as the story's narrator, which was done perfectly. The voice acting job on Lucifer's character is really well done. And it gave his character a nice edge, as he always seemed to know more of the events to unfold than me. But I do suspect, however, that Lucifer's character was so noteworthy because the story and other characters around him were so weak. But that does not mean I couldn't enjoy his presence every single time I ran into him. Still, it's unfortunate to say, but the characters were mostly forgettable, and the role they played in the story was lackluster, as it added another chaotic layer to what a simple and straightforward story should have been. And while it's true that the story took heavy inspiration from that book, it should not mean it needs to depend on you knowing that book to understand the story here. But where the story and characters were forgettable and lackluster, the art style and this game's presentation definitely was not. The art style in this game is just beautiful, and better yet, the game knows how to use it together with its story and gameplay. The game states it's a platformer, but to me it felt a little bit like it became a platformer to properly display its art style in the best way possible. The platforming gameplay is not constrained to a 2 or 3D camera perspective, and instead switches around regularly depending on what it tries to show and tell. In one moment you're walking over a thin platform that hovers above a city in a 3D environment, and in the next you are in a colorful kids-like world that is in a more 2D environment. One of my favorite moments where the art style and gameplay mixed perfectly was this stained glass window level where you are introduced to the 7 fallen angels. It was just a visual gimmick level, but it was a damn nice one. You slowly climb up, uncovering more of the stained glass window, and hear Lucifer talk about each fallen angel. And again, this was more or less a gimmick level, as there were no enemies to fight or difficult jumps or pitfalls to fall into. It was purely there to be observed. Another cool moment where the gameplay and art style combined with one another really well was during the opening credits. You play as a shadow moving and fighting through the level, while you see colorful images in the background and hear a narration by Lucifer about the story. This was very cool and very well done, and thankfully it did return a couple of times later in the game, yet it didn't lose its novelty by being overused. Going into El Shaddai, I actually did expect that to happen. It's a problem I run into often with games that offer a very unique and interesting art style. However, the art style tone switches constantly but also drastically in this game, which helps to avoid this problem. The only problem I honestly had with the art style of this game was that some levels had a better art style that carried more impact than others. However, I would call that problem to a degree a personal one, as it leans more to the matter of personal taste than design. Because even in levels that looked messy and confusing to the eyes, I could still see beauty in it. And as a bonus, even made to a degree sense to the story. If it wasn't clear yet, I really liked the art style in this game. Every level was just another treat to the eyes, and while some were better than others, the overall art style was just beautiful. But art styles and graphics are just a visual thing, and while I do like it, I do value gameplay over it heavily. So let's talk about gameplay. El Shaddai is mostly a platformer with combat intervals from time to time. Now, the platforming is self-explained, and in terms of difficulty, it's very easy. The jumps themselves feel a bit floaty, however, you can compensate that with the double jump and the hover ability. Failing jumps or falling off the map does not come with huge consequences, as the game is very forgiving. Checkpoints are at every jump segment, and you won't instantly die when you fail a jump or fall off the map. All that really happens is that you lose some HP and you get respawned right at the place that you died, so you can try again right away. This design strengthened my feeling that the platforming is mostly there just to keep traversing the world fun and a bit interesting, while enhancing the presentation of the art style. The combat is just like the platforming, very simplistic, but it has a little bit more difficulty to it than the platforming. At first it feels like a rather simple hack and slash. You have to obviously destroy your corrupted enemies. However, after a while your weapon also starts to get corrupted. Once your weapon is corrupted, the damage output is lower, and if you don't purify it, it will eventually shatter. Once your weapon is shattered, you lost it and are placed in a big disadvantage compared to your enemies. Luckily, you can steal weapons from your enemies by first beating them into a weakened state. There are 3 types of weapons which you can divide into balanced, range and close combat. The weapon design itself looks really cool. The balanced one looks a little bit like the swords used by the Klingons in Star Trek. This weapon is the most straightforward to use. The close combat weapons are these gauntlets that can form a shield. They have a really nice bulky feeling to it, and whenever you land a punch with it, you can really feel the weight behind them. And lastly, the ranged weapons, which are personally my favorite, as it gives you great mobility and speed during combat. The game tries to make a bit of a rock paper scissors system with these weapons, which works during boss battles, but in normal encounters is barely noticeable. I do recommend to keep switching between weapons, because otherwise the combat itself will have a monotone feeling to it. The weapons do, however, have a bigger impact on the platforming aspect in the game. The balanced one gives you the before mentioned hover ability while jumping, and the ranged one gives you a forward boost to make longer jumps. In boss battles, however, the rock paper scissors system was done more justice, but even there it had some rough moments. These boss battles were alright and actually fun. There are a lot of boss battles that are basically copy-paste, but the bigger ones had some nice difficulty to it, and some fun patterns you had to learn to beat them. Though I would not call these fights difficult, as just like with the platforming, the game is very forgiving here. I really love the idea behind using the armor as an indication of your HP. When you get hit, your armor slowly starts to break, and the more broken it is, the closer you are to death. It's not a new or unique concept only done by this game, I'm well aware of that, but it's just a rare game design that I really like to see. I can see what they tried to do with the gameplay here, and overall it's really solid and fun at times. But nearing the end of the game it did get repetitive and bland. And that is a good thing if you ask me. This game would have definitely been worse off if it was jam-packed with other content or a deeper combat system. I see this combat more as a fun distraction than anything else, and it's clear that the game wants you to be focused on the other elements instead of beating your enemies to pulp. Unfortunately for the combat and the game itself, the other elements, mostly the story, are lackluster. The opportunity and the space the gameplay gives to the other elements is not fully utilized. El Shaddai was a fun little experience, one that I look back at fondly. The art style is again just beautiful, and the constant tone switches really made me curious to see what was ahead. The combat is simple and works in a way that it was intended, just a fun little distraction. And some of the characters were really nice, in particular Lucifer. The only thing that pulls this game down is the story, and unfortunately it's what this game needs the most. Maybe if I knew the original work, I wouldn't have minded the chaotic mess, as I had knowledge that could fill in the gaps the game leaves. But I didn't have that, and I had to depend solely on the story given in this game, which was just not good enough. Still, it was fun, cool, and a beautiful experience, which I would definitely recommend to you if you are like me and want to see this artistic side in gaming. But if you expect anything more or different outside of that, then I won't recommend this game to you, as you will unfortunately be disappointed.